Okay, well, that is really something, Noel. Uh, Noel, for all my viewers out there, he sent a lengthy sort of apologia and explanation of what he was working on here. And just to introduce it very quickly, I think that Noel was looking for a kind of a lost clarinet concerto in this work, and he added a as a middle movement. He added an orchestration of an aria, which is quite interesting. It just very quite beautiful. I don't have time to go over it in this very long video. Because there's going to be a lot of explanations, corrections, observations, and so on. It's going to be long enough without adding that. And Noel already sort of bent the rules a little bit by orchestrating, a almost completely new version of the second repeat, which is something I didn't want people to do. But in this case, I'd say, considering that, you know, this was a dotted longa entry, and I took 2 years to get to it. That's my apologia. So it's fine. Actually, I'm being a little inaccurate there in saying that the second version of the repeat of the first half of this movement is completely different. It's not at all. There are a lot of approaches that are borrowed from the first. So a lot of things that I mention in the orchestration will be valid for both parts, and I may just kind of skip past things, except for just to mention, of course, whatever new element might be in the page. Usually that will be the clarinet solo. And that is because that Noel has structured this sort of as the kind of as the first repeat of this being like the exposition section, right? Which is pretty traditional for a late classical era concerto, where there would be a pretty big exposition section, might last, you know, quite long. Actually, you look at Brahms and Beethoven and so on; they could really go on quite, and Mozart too, pretty extended. Before they even brought the soloist in, which is why I really love the fourth Beethoven piano concerto. He just gets right, he lets the pianist start, and that must have been so refreshing to everybody, and especially any soloist who took it on after Beethoven. To just be able to sit down at the piano and play, and not have to wait around for 20 minutes or what. It's not 20 minutes, but it feels like it. So anyway, so with all of that said, all right, I completely forgive you, Noel. But just to kind of let everybody out there know, I can't, I if we do have another repeat section in something to orchestrate in future challenges, I really can't. I cannot have the rules bent in the future. Especially if I'm getting 187 entries, or whatever it was. It was an enormous amount in 2023. And it was one of those things where I'm kind of thinking, with my level of health, I'll probably have to have like the next orchestration challenge might have to be just limited, just to like maybe top tier Patreon orchestration online Patreon supporters, and just a very small one to see if I can get my bearings, and then opening up and getting bigger and so on. I had planned to have a really big, fantastically excessive 10th anniversary orchestration challenge, because in 2024 it was 10 years since our first orchestration challenge in 2014. But they hadn't really been consistent and so on, and maybe what I'll do is save that big splendiferous idea for 2029, which will be the 20th anniversary of the channel. If you can think of, I have been on, I've been on YouTube for 16 years. I cannot believe it. I've seen that place change from just people having fun and having these beautiful little communities, very intimate, and a lot of times people were just making videos for each other, and they might have like, you know, a few dozen views, and they were happy with that. That didn't really, the whole push to monetize and to make huge amounts of money and get huge amounts of views and worry about falling down in the algorithm if you didn't get, if you didn't do something to tweak it. That just didn't exist back then, and people were getting, there. I remember these little channels with these young virtuoso pianists. Like they were all like about age 11 to 14, and they would just make joke videos for each other, and they'd spoof each other, and they would, and they'd talk about practicing and all this other stuff, and they didn't really care. They didn't have anything to protect, or they didn't have any ground to to fight over. So anyway, I miss those days. All right, well, I'll talk about that in a video when I do a retrospect. But this is going to be probably a longer one. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. It's hard to judge. But I've got a lot to say here at the beginning, especially in terms of my my enhanced evaluation. So let's get straight to that, okay? And this is going to sort of miss the treatment of the solo part, which I've got a lot to say about, but I'll try to incorporate that into the just the kind of the general, not the general, but the evaluation criteria, the kind of the last rundown, which we'll get to in about maybe 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes. I don't know. We'll just see how long this takes. All right. But I promise to make it worth your while. Okay. So there are a few things here in our general, my general notes. One of them is that it's you're going for not really a period feel, but I mean it feels kind of middle romantic period, really, like a lot of your orchestration kind of, it sort of feels to me like, say, Mendelssohn or Schubert kind of looking back on Beethoven. It really is or maybe Brahms, maybe a little bit looking back on Beethoven, rather than necessarily being something written with Beethoven's outlook in orchestration. And if that is if that is so, then I completely see that it's fine for you to have what is essentially chromatic brass. So you I don't know if you made a big effort or not. There are some things that that work beautifully, like for instance this bar right here is great for natural horns, but then you start throwing in D, right, and F, and so on, and those would be stopped pitches and they would be allowable and so on, but and I did a bit of cheating too, but generally speaking, you have so many pitches that are not like you're not starting from the position of trying to get almost everything natural or open pitches and then a few stopped pitches. You just really are freely interpreting everything, right? So I would say that I would say if like for instance C sharp, like a natural trumpet player can't play that, right? Or this F, right? They can correct with their lip for the B. So let's just say that these are chromatic brass parts, right? So something that would be more of a kind of a late romantic period sort of a innovation. So if that is, you fully accept that, then you can definitely utilize these instruments more freely. If you'd really, if you'd been holding back, especially in places like this, like this build towards the big triumphant ending chord on C, right? If you had been kind of thinking, oh, well, just like maybe I need to limit some of these pitches, then look, if you're just going to have chromatic horns and trumpets anyways, then you might as well just bring them in when you want to bring them in. And the same thing is absolutely true. If we accept that you're scoring for modern chromatic brass, you might as well add a couple of kettles for a full set of 4 here in your timpani. And that way, you can, that would be standard by the period in which you would be accepting chromatic brass, right? And if that's so, you could just throw in a couple more pitches, and you could even make them tunable, right? So you can get, like, say, we'll get to the second movement, and I might be forgetting that you had done that, that you'd had more pitches and more, more chromaticism in your timpani part. Okay, so but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But yeah, so you can add more kettles and you can make them more tunable, I think. Okay, so there are some basic issues here of your flute and oboe scoring. All right, and like a lot of this is really baked in, So it's a question of, like, how much work do you want to put into this to sort of reorchestrate it and make it a little cleaner, a little more. A little more clear, or a little, like to sort of. I'm going to be talking about some particular, not really rules, but approaches that are more complementary to the instrument, more clear in sound and respectful of the instrument's role, and so on, right? And the big issue with the approach that you have taken here is the role of flute 2. Okay, so let's say that, like, the top line here of oboe 1 and flute 1 doubling and so on, it all goes pretty well, and that's because the flute does not get below D5, right? Okay, however, like here you've got things where you got places where oboe 2 is doubling flute 2 and it's below D5, and you also have places where oboes 1 and 2 enclose flute 2. Oboes 1 and 2 enclose flute 2, right? So you've got doubling of flute 2, low, very low. You've got the enclosure of flute 2, and then there are places, let's see, a little bit later on, where you've got like 3-part harmony, and flute 2 is being doubled by oboe 1, right? So you've got this mixed kind of a timbre in the middle, right? So fortunately these pitches are above D, right? It's like it's that whole thing about D being kind of this barrier or limit or so on. It's not completely it's not a hard limit, but it's still just a good frame of reference, right? It's just like thinking, okay, how far are we going and so on. Like, for instance, here you've got F, the top F doubled by flute and oboe 1, right? And then here you've got the C here enclosed by your oboes, right? Then you've got the E doubled by oboe and so on. So it might really be good for you to go back and do some more score reading of Beethoven's treatment of parts like this, right? And just to kind of get a better handle on it. Now, having said all that, like, occasionally throwing in something like this it's not really a problem. The problem is taking this approach all the time, right? Because it just, at a certain point, the second flute just becomes, kind of like a, not really all that needed. And there are lots of places where, like, you have all this weight at the top in your winds, and you've got no support of the second violins, right? So nobody is thickening this line, which could easily have, you've got these you've got this middle line here that's just being doubled in both parts. What if you just left this to the flutes, and then you had this C right here in first oboe, and then second oboe was doubling this, right? What if you tried to find more ways of spreading out what's going on in your oboes and flutes to help support the second violins a little bit more? Obviously, we can't use like section clarinets because you want to keep them out of the action so that they don't interfere with your solo clarinet. And and that's perfectly fine. And of course, like if you are giving this to like a chamber orchestra, regional, semi-pro, university kind of orchestra situation, they might not have anybody available, except for that clarinetist who might be the first clarinetist of the section, and that's those two clarinetists are the only people available. So you just give the second clarinetist the 20 minutes or so off that it would take to play through this, right? And so they can go over and hang out on the Orchestration Online Facebook group and, tell people who are asking clarinet questions what to do. So just if there's ways of spreading out the oboe and flute harmony, then you just solve all your problems immediately. Now there's a few other things like here, like you've got tutti, and I think then you've got like when your clarinet comes in, you say solo and then tutti and solo and so on. So look, these markings are completely unnecessary. Okay, and they're also partially a danger, and I'll tell you why. Okay. So like in the first place, like they're unnecessary because you know who is in charge of figuring this out is the conductor, right? And the conductor will guide the musicians to an awareness of how to play certain sections, right? So it's not necessary to put this in system text in everybody's part. They will get it, right? Then there's also the danger that players will misread this. Say like a string player might see this solo part, like say your double bassist might see this solo part in their system text and then think, oh, I'm playing a solo here. And then suddenly they're, even though this is marked mezzo piano, which would be here, right? They might play like poco forte, right? And just put a lot of expression into it and interfere with this opening here. Do you see what I mean? Then the other danger too is that orchestra management will see all these solo, tutti, solo things written over, at the top of the of your page, right? And think, oh, geez, does this also have solo flutes in it? What's going on here? I don't think we can afford to hire solo flute players. Okay, I guess we won't do this. We'll pass on this score. Right? So you're endangering your score. Leave it out, okay? Leave this stuff out. Right? It's good for things like concerti grossi, right? Things like that. But it's completely unnecessary in a modern concerto score or even a romantic concerto score. Okay. And there's a few little things, some general things. Okay, here you've got, I think very wisely, portato in your violas, right? So, and that's very, very good for making these individually articulated and yet feeling smooth, just like the other slurred parts, right? So do the same thing for your bassoons, right? Wherever you run into this, is there some at the beginning? No, I guess not. But yeah, so just like take the same approach when you have like repeated notes, and then here like in second oboe, first oboe, if you take my advice and drop the second part down to here. So yeah, so this oboe part, these repeated C's could also be portato, right? All right. And then dovetailing should dovetailing notes should always be the same value in both parts. Okay, this is, if you need anybody to back me up on this, Stravinsky actually writes about this. I can't remember. It's in one of his books, I think. So, like for instance, you have a situation here with this bass part, which ends, which bass function. It's not. I mean, it's not basses, but it's the bass function of the passage. This ends with a quarter note, right? Okay, so that's all well and good. But to have the same thing happen in your second violins is wrong, because this should end on an eighth note so that it's seamless in dovetailing to the next part, right? You can really hear this G hanging on as the first violin takes over from the second violins. And the same thing here, you can really hear this E hanging on in your mock-up, and it will do that in real life too, right? So just make them eighth notes. So just, I say, go through this entire score, look over every part where you had this thematic material dovetail from instruments to instrument, right? And make sure they're the same. They are the same duration. Now, you might think, well, do I have to make them like triplet eighths? No, you don't have to. Just make it an eighth note or a quaver, right? That's good enough. But but don't make it twice the duration or more. And speaking of proofreading, I felt that you did a really, really great job of marking like a due or instrument 1 or instrument 2 and so on in your wind and brass parts. Now that doesn't mean that you got every single one right. I would say proofread it anyways, right? Maybe you already did, but do it again. The thing that also needs proofreading, because you do mention in your apologia that you're not really up on certain string techniques, which I thought actually you did really well. The thing that you need to proof for, though, is the whole idea of like double stops or divisi or whatever, right? So this, for instance, this does not need to be divisi because it is just an open G fifth, right? So kind of looking forwards, you could probably, all of this could be played non-divisi, right? If you wanted to, but it doesn't have to be because it's so soft, right? So probably the players would be happy just to play this as open G fifths, right? But this could be divisi, right? So just look through and see, check out, what do you want non-divisi, what do you want divisi, and make sure that when you're finished with a divisi passage that you go back and you say unison, right? So that the players don't think, like half the desks don't think, okay, well, the other half of my desk is going to play this. I'll just sit this out because I didn't get told that it's going back to unison, right? So always mark unison afterwards. And you might think, well, geez, I mean, there are plenty of places, I've seen a lot of orchestral scores where that isn't marked, Well, guess what? Those are pieces that everybody studied at the conservatory, or pieces that are going to get a lot more rehearsal time than yours, right? So you have to assume that your piece is going to get maybe at best a reading, right? And the reading will be under huge pressure. They won't have time to do anything. They will just they'll just go through it, and if you're lucky, they'll allow you to make an archival recording, and that's it for this piece. You just don't know, right? Or it might get performed a zillion times. And here's the thing, even if it is performed a zillion times, you might have a situation where your soloist is going from orchestra to orchestra playing this piece, and they also don't have that much time to practice. So if everything is spelled out absolutely and it's just like as clearly as possible, so there's no doubt about what's intended, then that really helps the string players, the other issues for the wind and brass. And because, just like every raised hand at rehearsal, if everybody in the orchestra is making scale, right, $125 an hour, or it might be more now. If everybody is making scale, raised hands at rehearsal cost you, or just they cost time, and time is money, right? If you're paying for the session, a raised hand in rehearsal that costs $75, right? Or more, or several hundred if it's a problem where everybody has to stop and pencil things in, and they've got to talk to you, and you're not sure what to do, and you want to hear them play it a couple different ways. All that stuff costs money, right? So, all right. Okay, so those are my general comments. Actually, I thought it would be a bit longer than that, but that's okay. It's good. It's long enough. So now let's talk about a few bar by bar things. And I have a lot of notes on this before we even get to the general evaluation criteria. I should stop calling that general. Okay, so I totally understand if there are limitations with Movt score in putting a bar line in the middle, right? And and then starting like a new time signature, like this could start back here with an incomplete bar and so on. So it could be that that's something that is possible in Movt score, but it's just a lot of doohickying, and really takes a specialized level of knowledge. But whatever it is, you've got to work that out. If you're going to stick with Movt score and you're going to release this to orchestra and everything else, like these enhanced evaluation notes are for you to get this ready for the stands, right? And it looks like you've got an interested soloist, so by golly, you might want to do all this stuff, right? So whatever Beethoven did here is what you need to do. Okay, so incomplete bar of 2/4 coming to an end, then a double bar, right? Not a reverse ending bar. Double bar here with the incomplete, or with the pickup, the pickup beat with the time signature back here, right? And then no need for any kind of specialized bar here, right? So double bar, just a plain double bar here, right? Just exactly how I set it up in the template, how Beethoven has it in the piano score. That is what you got to do, all right? Now, so I talked about this already a little bit. So I added another note about this. About like flutes and oboes and playing a lot of unison things. There are some places where it's really beautiful. Like I think right here, this is excellent. Right, this is just so great because there are no duplicated pitches. It's all nicely stacked harmony. Now and right in here, like these pitches right in here are great. Like in terms of unison intervals in flutes and oboes. It's a perfect little limited area where they balance in a really lovely way. But then here, like you've got the octave oboes and you've got the second flute in the middle. So the second flute will tend to disappear because it's just no way near enough as strong, right? So just you might have to do a lot of rethinking to make this work. And once again, who's supporting the second violin line in the repeated section? It's the clarinet. But maybe here, instead of just having this be the same way that it is in the recap for this, which is the repeat essentially. What if this first part could support the second violin line, right? As you do here, like see how this this F E D C, right? We've got that in our oboes, right? So couldn't this stuff leading up to it, contribute, and then you don't have to worry about so much duplication in flutes and oboes. Maybe rethink this. Now, there's a okay, so there's my mouse keeps jumping over to the other screen. Silly Macintosh. There's a bit of reinterpretation of the accompaniment part in here, and I'll talk about this a little bit as well when we go over it, over the evaluation criteria. This bar right here just really kind of feels problematic to me because the motion of the accompaniment is calling so much attention to itself, right? So I feel here it really does kind of clutter up, rather than smoothly accompanying in a way that supports, right? It's more calling attention to itself, and I think that's kind of like, that is a problem. I think you want things here that don't have so much. They don't take so much focus. It's sort of the reversal of the function right in here that is a problem. So just really watch out what's happening here in first bassoon and violas, and maybe you don't need this A right in here, right? So just watch out, right? Maybe rethink this. Just try to have this B have more of a smooth contour rather than kind of the way that this sort of leaps up and so on. I do like the way it descends, though. It's really nice there. Now going ahead here, this is something that, just as this could also be a kind of a general comment for things that are similar in later sections, right? And of course, this is something where you have the clarinet double the second violins. Okay, but here you don't have that. What you have instead is you have the oboes, a due oboes, which are going to be very penetrating and almost trumpet-like. You have them leap up and then double the flutes by the time we get down below D here. Like these pitches here are just going to be completely invisible compared, up against the violins and the oboes. It'll really be that warm violin plus oboe sound here. And it'll even that which will be taking over by around the second beat. So the flutes are basically just inclusionary here, right? That they are there just for the sake of being there, right? And so that they can finish their line. Okay, well and good. And we've already talked about some of the enclosure problems here. What I'm wondering is, just in this case, like maybe not later on when you've got the clarinet, but in this case, why can't the oboe just continue descending to about here on this G, and then jump up to the F here, and then then take this middle line so that the flutes can do their job, right, of doubling the first violins, and the second violins can get some support at least down to this G, and then on this G you can go to octaves in your bassoons, right? And that top line here, this line here can be doubled by first bassoon, right? And then you can get a consistent flow of woodwind doubling for your triple octave here. Now, speaking of that triple octave, here it would be better just for this to end with a rest and then pick up again, rather than to hold on to this low C and then have it change to like a minor second dissonance against the bassoon, right? So just better to just stop. Yeah, and there are a bunch of different weird little harmony things, right? And this is something possibly if you were to do some proofreading, you would just catch it yourself. Yeah. Yeah, so here, just before B, I think I accidentally called this B in my notes. I'll see if I can fix that before I put that up. Okay, so this should be a G octave, right? You've already got the, like just in terms of like the leading tone, right? It's better, like you've already got the implied leading here in this F. So it has to lead to bum, 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 right? So this needs to be an octave, right? You've already made the point of the seventh, right? Let's see. This is. I wish I could put this all on one screen. It's just difficult. Okay. Now here, like the string harmony is a bit aggressive, right? Just like these E's in here coming in, they're just a bit clunky. Do you know what I mean? Try reordering this a little bit, right? So stay on. How about just staying on F here in the basses for the first two beats, and then these pitches here in the violas could be like D's, right? And then you go to E in the basses and C in your violas, right? So try playing with that a little bit, right? Here's where you change the harmony radically, right? To that E in the bass. Just really be careful, because like what's in the harmony in the original piano score, it's just thirds, right? So really be careful when you expand things out hugely like this. It can just the accompaniment can once again start to distract from the beauty of the line, right? And we don't want that. All right. Okay, so 20. All right, 27 to 28. Yeah, so what if flute 2 just sat on a G5 here all the way through? And then you end up with a nice stacked C major chord, right? Instead of this E sort of being wasted in the second flute, and like all of these Fs being kind of wasted there. That way you just, you have the suspension, right, is much clearer in the upper winds, right? And then this seventh chord here has got the F built into it, up against the G, right? In both wind parts. So it's, for instance, that's just an example of how to rewrite some of this harmony. All right, and then speaking of which, so here you've got this beautiful idea. I like the difference in, there's some problems here, but we'll talk about those as we come to them. Do you see the problem here? It's just like you're not allowing this line to descend. Whenever you throw in this stuff on the top, you keep jacking up the audience's attention. Like, oh, now we're up again, and then we're up again, right? So there isn't, like, the natural flow downwards is getting hijacked, right? So the audience just can't settle down, and then by the time this cello line takes over, it's like, where did that cello line come from? Because the attention, the focus of the audience's ear was not allowed to settle down because of all of this interference here, right? So watch out for that. There's another spot, which I'd mentioned in these bar by bar evaluations. I'll talk about that. But just avoid stuff like this, where you just keep piling on higher and higher as things are trying to descend lower and lower, right? Let's jump ahead a bit. Hey there, Noel. This is Thomas from the future. The future of me having done the evaluation for this. I'm just jumping in with this audio note here to let you know that your bar 38 seems to have been numerated in your score twice. That's why the following analysis that happens after this point is off by one bar. So I have adjusted things to be accurate in my evaluation notes that will be posted at the end of this section to reflect the wrong numeration. So use that to fix the mistakes, and then go back and fix this bar, the one right at rehearsal mark A2. Okay, so just letting you know. All right, now back to my evaluation that I did yesterday. I've got a lot to say about these things, but I'll talk about them with the criteria. Um, okay. Um, yeah, oops. Okay, so I'm going to try to correct this. I'm going to try to remember to correct this. This is supposed to be bar 70, not 71. So yeah, this is supposed to be a D, correct? Not just repeating a C. And then here, at bar 73, if you don't put a flat sign above this, I mean, you could hear it in the mock-up, right? Is that you ended up with a trill that was an augmented second. In other words, sounding like a minor third, like a shake over a minor third, rather than a trill over a whole step, right? So make sure you put the flat sign above. Right? There's a few. We're gonna cover a bunch of little errors. Probably just having a lot of things to worry about, and maybe not listening to the mock-up very much, and kind of trying to fine tune that. Okay, a little farther ahead now. Now, if I'm being picky about pitches and things like that, that's just because like this is the kind of thing, if you were coming to me and saying, Thomas, I've got to get this ready for the stands, right? That's what we would cover, right? We would talk about a lot of these things. So yeah, so there's maybe some copy paste errors. This right here, this beam group should be one diatonic step lower, right? The way that it is scored, it is the same reading pitches as your violas, right? So, or actually, so I'm saying that wrong. They should be, see, da 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 dum. Right. It should be one step lower. Yeah, because it should be written B, right, sounding A, right, to match the violas. And then jumping ahead a little bit to bar 100, there are a few little things here. This trillo needs a flat sign over it, right? Just to make harmonic sense, right? Because of the B flat later on in the bar, right? So it's the same trill, right? You can't just assume that the player is going to understand that they're supposed to play B flat. You got to indicate it here over the trill. And then at 104, I guess that's 103. Sorry, I'm sorry about all these mental notes. I think partially because I was looking at the XML, and the XML put the restored like certain bar lines that are different than yours. Yeah, so this has to have a flat sign over it for the same reason as back in bar 73, like, or because that same the shake has to be a whole step rather than an augmented second. And then yeah, so what is it? I think so. This one is 103 should be 104. Boy, I really messed myself up here in miscounting these bars. So I think that this, I think it's this one needs a may need a flat sign over the top, one or the other. I will look over my notes and try to correct the the bar numbers on this. Boy, I just really messed up on my bar numbers. Yeah, so this needs I think it needs does it need a natural sign over it? Yeah. Yeah. That's what it is, I think. Okay. And then this should have the string harmony adjusted the same exact way that I suggested it, just transposed, as we saw previously in bar 17. All right. All right, let's jump ahead a little bit. All right, so at 122 to 123, this this horn harmony looks like a copy paste from bars 31 to 32, right? And they weren't adjusted like this. Right? I think you intend this here, right? Okay, and then speaking of these two bars, this should be a G sharp, right? Not an A flat. And this should also be a G sharp, not an F natural. Or an F sharp, sorry. And then there was like one other thing wrong, and that is yeah, your cellos should have an F sharp, right? So it's just like that, that this A flat should be sounding F sharp, right? So yeah, so this should be, these are C trumpets, right? So this should be an F sharp, sorry. And then right, and then this should also be F sharp in your oboes, right? So kind of have the same problem in a lot of places. F sharp here in the flute, not G flat. Right? Okay, and then then here once again we have the same, the same problem with your upper winds keeping the focus high when we should allow them to descend, right? All right, then just kind of going to the very end of the piece. This is something that you might have heard me comment on and maybe already expecting this critique. So like your timpani's got it perfectly right here. Nice solid accents. So everybody else should just have nice solid accents here. You don't need you don't need the bouncy bunny kind of feeling here, right? You want it just to be bam, 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 bam. This is why I wanted so much for people to really listen to Spencer Myer's articulation and adjust accordingly, right? Like maybe the piano score has accents, has staccatos played forte. So you might think, well, that's okay, so we'll just put in, accented staccato, right? But that still is too doink, 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 right? It's too jumpy. It should be more like right? It's Beethoven like emphatically pounding out those last chords, right? So that's not bouncy. That is their short notes in the sense of like the string staccato not being bouncy. But the problem is when you put everybody else like the winds and the brass behind it, then it has a lot much too much lift to it, right? So just accents or maybe even like marcato, right? So with marcato you get the separation, but you also get the slashing kind of the what they call martellato, right? So hammering in the strings. So it's like a big forceful bow stroke, right? Okay, so those are my. Wow, that is that was quite a lot in terms of the enhanced evaluation. You are getting the best out of me. But look, if this ends up being a really long video, you did it to yourself, Noel, by by adding that extra material. Actually, it's not really true because I haven't really talked about that in that particular context. But now we are going to. So, let's see here. See if we can get my system to behave. All right. All right. So let's talk about the evaluation criteria. So our first, our first concern here is, does the intro set the mood effectively? And I feel like, if this is going to be the introduction to a concerto, to a clarinet concerto, it's really nice to allow your soloist to make a statement at the beginning. That's that's really nice, Here with your second violins and violas, do we really, do we need to bow these? Do these repeated notes need to be under one bow? Could you possibly move the slur forward? So you got this ba ba, right? Or maybe even just tie this ta ta, right? And then these slurs should all match, right? So just move this slur back. So you get your bowing is uniform. Right? Why I would say tying this, it's the way that it is now. It feels a little sloppy to me because it's it'll be played as a demi portato, right? Sort of as there'll be a slight separation between these two, but it won't be like a real draggy portato. It'll just be a little, just a teeny bit of emphasis on this note. And that's well and good if that's what you intend. But if you weren't even thinking about it and you just drop this slur across it, then I want you to think about it and think about what you really want here. If you want this to be as smooth as silk, just absolutely seamless, then I would say tie these notes here. If you want it to be more organized, move the slur forward in all parts to the second beat. So ta ta ta. Right, in these same parts, ba ba ba, right? Now, as far as as this goes, this feels like a sort of an extrapolation of the fact that there's just a little eighth note under the da 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 da, which you would think would let go, but once again, listening to Spencer Myer's interpretation, you hear that he's holding his thumb down on the F as the top part of his hand goes ya da 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 da, and he holds everything together. This is one of the things that's sort of deceptive about Beethoven's score. It should have been scored as a quarter note, right? So that it would just, it would last all the way through. So if you sort of extended that gap, that perceived gap, all the way to here, and you just really wanted it to sort of sit on this one single clarinet note, then fine. However, if you decided to make this just a nice long fermata in all parts and and then everybody ends together, right? You cannot escape the fact that fermata needs to be read by everybody, right? So you are going to have to put in the double bar here, right? So that would mean that there would be simple quarter rests in all parts, and they would all have fermatas over them, right? Except for the ones that are playing things. And then here, ta ta, and then once again, they'll have to have quarter rests. Be very careful that your application doesn't give you bar rests on either side of your double bar, because that's something that with incomplete bars, Sibelius doesn't understand that incomplete bars should be given the rests for the value. There should be something in Sibelius that figures out that if the incomplete bar is not a part of the given time signature that it will supply not bar rests, but duration rests, right, for the empty space. Okay. Yeah, it's just a huge weakness. Just like the weakness in Sibelius that they have not yet figured out a way for you to set your own template to always start a new score. Right? You should be able to have your own house style, and anytime you want to start working on something in Sibelius, it automatically uploads that one. Right? There's no way to set it because they haven't figured that out yet. I guess they don't think that's important. Does this mean that most users, are they just assuming most users of Sibelius are fly-by-night people, just like doing it for like they'll use it for 1 or 2 years and then just give up? Right? Is that what they're trying to say? Come on, Sibelius. I love you, but that needs to be fixed. Okay, but you used MuseScore, so I shouldn't waste your time about it. All right, so the next question is, piano dolce. Does the melody start with elegance? Here you got these nice octaves. Ya da 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 da. Once again, a lot of weight at the top and not any doubling of the second violins, right? So we don't really hear the octave here. And then, as far as a natural transition to octaves is concerned, you already are in octaves, right? So that box is checked. One thing that's, I feel like with all these pitches, like you've got an octave chord with an E and a C in it, right? So where's the C? All right. So could that C have been represented by anybody? It doesn't really appear to be in anywhere above. You've got the C in other places, right? Like for instance, the C trumpet here, but like it's not in the harmony of the thematic part, right? So spreading out your oboes might just really solve a lot of these problems. And I like the little flex here, and then the diminuendo to piano. That's just really nice. Like I'm complaining a little bit about the this right in here. Like does this expand without clogging up? No, it really is a little. It just really does call attention to itself. But you can reorder this to be a lot smoother. Right? Just look for smoothness that doesn't rise above. Everybody can push together, but just make sure that part doesn't rise above the level of focus, right? And give these poor second violins some sweetness from, like here, if they're ending on a B flat together with your seconds, maybe give some of this love down here to the oboes would sound beautiful down here, and they give a really nice strong sound to the seconds, especially as you expand, right? So with that, I would say, we get close to the goals set there. This is cool, just like the little touch of brass. That's nice. Maybe a dotted half note, right, rather than just a half note. Okay, so now we get to this this area here, the leggermente, and I'm really glad that you put in. You wrote that in, and once again we're in octaves and so on. So there isn't a huge contrast with the theme or contrast between lines. They're all like in strings, as before. But I mean, it's still, I think it works good just in the context of you having this be a sort of a concerto kind of an approach. So I feel that the boxes are ticked there, right? And you didn't need any harmonic support. You just interpreted what was on the page, but in octaves. All right, now here we get into this. And I already commented about like letting the oboes descend and then having the bassoons take over on the lower G, right? right, as octaves here in these parts. And if you want to jump the oboes up and then cushion this, and the flutes, of course, become a little invisible and then coming out of it, right? And then, of course, I talked about the harmony here. So these are all things that you can just work out for yourself. But I mean, can we spare a second oboe here for some of this? Or you don't need it here, right? All right, now, all that said, I really love this. Ba 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 da 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 dum. If there's any way to bring in, like, say, like maybe second horn or something like that to double your cellos here, it would be nice. We've got the doubling here in first horn, right? But I just feel that this bum ba da, I think that would really, really help set up what the harmony that follows, right? And yeah, once again, you flex and then you drop down to a piano. Oh, that's really great. And then just bassoons, horns, and strings. Bum, bum. This could be non-divisi. Da da da, bum, bum. So here you just do like, you don't do terrace dynamics. You just do terrace scope of scoring, right? Which gives you the broader dynamic. Okay. So yeah, so that's a pretty good first section, right? All right, so let's jump ahead. All right. And just look at all of this stuff in the scope of how does section A work, A2 work compared to A, right? All right, so here we have like a really similar approach. Da 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 ba 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 bum, and then da 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 da. See, now this makes a lot more sense when you've got your solo clarinetist right here in the middle, right? So this is mezzo piano dolce crescendo to a forte, all right, and back down to mezzo piano. It's okay to have slightly, it's okay to put the clarinet in front a little bit. That's fine. Yeah, and then once again, I would adjust this. Whatever solution you come up, if you take my advice in the previous, put it in here. Then everything else I think is fine. And then then bassoon bum, and then answered by oboe. I think that's really great to not just to give your soloist a little time off, and then have them answer bum. And then once again here now, like here, this is justified by having the oboe leap up here and leaving the bassoon one out of it. Then you give a lot of space here for your clarinet to push forwards. You don't need the crescendo mark if you've got the hairpin. And then and then you just do these little slurs. Ba da 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 da. Ba 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 bum da da da. Maybe staccato on the C sharp. Right, but pretty much like, remember I said add portato to some of these and so on. Maybe give the second violin a little accompaniment by the oboes and so on. Then same thing, adjust the harmony here. Da 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 ba bum. Yeah, it's just really built in for this was done as a clarinet, kind of a clarinet concerto sketch in a couple of other entries. Yeah, so I'm sure that a soloist can do this. And it's good that you add a little gap here for breathing and just relaxing the embouchure for a second. Yeah, and then I'm just not sure that this is powerful enough, right? You could so easily just add like stopped horn, stopped, open, stopped, open, stopped, open. Right. Or, yeah, I mean, I see what you're doing here with with a measured tremolo and the staccato with a marcato and so on. I mean, that's not a bad idea. And I like the little arpeggiation in here. I think that's very, very cool. Then this trill, da da trill, da da. Right. And we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little. Let's look at how the other B section was realized before, and we'll come back to this page or bar 56. Okay, so all right, so B. Okay, which is oboe. Yada da 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 ba dum bum. And we talked about this. And and check it out. Look, we've got the flute and second flute, first oboe doubling. Here it's not so onerous, right? I think it works here because the first flute is doing something so different, right? So it's almost like having first flute and first oboe joined together in something, and it's above D, right? Or it's just below D, so it's fine. C sharp to D and so on. Yeah, so this is not so bad. Yeah, and I really love the horns descending right in here. So this goes along with some of my criteria, thinking ahead to widening the gap, right? So like that's one of the problems here. Like Beethoven very accommodatingly just gives you thirds, right? And then he spreads them out, and then things get bigger and bigger. But like your approach here has been to just immediately have everything expanded to begin with. So you've got nowhere to go. It's already big, right? So you can go outward a little bit by a few pitches, right? I like this little question and answer thing. The kind of flutes doing the little dotted rhythm and the little thing on top, and then here changing it to oboe, playing the dotted rhythm above, a bit higher, and the little and once again, you could definitely have some of these pitches could be played by like these A's sounding D's could be played by your first trumpet, and then you could be going with a stopped open on your horns, and just get a and you double it up with the first bassoon, but just like get a much raspier kind of a real grunt there, right? And this is great the way the strings come in to double what's going on in the oboes. Yeah, and the little trill below in second voice. That's exactly how to do it. Yeah, and here is where I think you could have just slowly brought in horns and trumpets, gradually. I would say just below everybody else, right? So maybe if we're thinking the dynamic was piano, okay, so pianissimo crescendo to maybe start from a crescendo, and then start from a pianissimo, then you can crescendo forwards to forte. Yeah, and this is good. That's a forte, holding off on the trumpets getting too bright. Anyways, I mean, at least I think your horns could come in a little earlier if you want a little bit more solidity here. If you don't worry about it. Yeah, so that all works for me. So now, let's jump ahead to this B2 part. All right, so we just see it's the same thing. Just we were looking at it, and then I've made some comments about this and the trill and so on. Okay, so now, kind of looking at the way that this is all adding up, this is really fun. Just be aware that these high E's and D's can end up being a little squeaky, just like if they're kind of like flicked forwards and upwards to to like a high to a note in a upper clarino. It can be but I mean that's part of the charm of the instrument, right? So, yeah, and and here you're considering like the importance of having the solo part stand out a bit. I think maybe leaving out, like I was suggesting, you could bring in some horns a little earlier if you wanted to. Maybe leave them out here, right? Just so that you don't clutter up the sound picture too much. But I will say one thing is you really are piling on a lot of high winds over your clarinet solo. So just I mean, it's a situation where you could really just maybe back everybody off a bit, and it couldn't hurt, because that's going to happen anyways in rehearsal, right? Maybe crescendo forwards to a mezzo forte and then forte at the end, and all these parts, I would say. And just just like this here, you're going, and then maybe everybody could end on a nice big fortissimo together. Just because like you just have so much weight with these, you've got tenuto, like, you've just got these big full notes against, like if you really want this kind of flicking kind of like, if you really want that kind of like water droplets off the tips of your fingers kind of sound, then maybe you need to back off on these wind tenutos a bit. All right, so now let's go back to this is going to be a long one, folks. Let's go back to C. Okay, and I already mentioned, the fact that you need to dovetail in eighths when you're separating the thematic material like this between parts. Okay, so concerns here. Is there a new quality of tone? You continue to use strings to state main themes, and that's pretty typical for Beethoven concerto scoring. This is not, you're not taking the symphonic approach, although there's always something a little symphonic about concerto openings, like for big grand concertos like this, like it's sort of the scope that you have here. The length is not grand, right? But the scope is grand. So yeah, I mean it's fine. It's fine. Just strings and so on, right in here. And yeah, just it's all going to be quite lovely. Yeah, there's a lot of places where your dynamics like jump back to the rest or something like that. So maybe that's something in MuseScore. Just make sure that it's over here, okay? And then there were, I think there were some problems in the harmony or something. Okay, yeah, so, all right, so here's a problem. Okay. All right. So, in Beethoven's score, he is contrasting these two chord progressions in terms of register, right? So when you throw this in here in the flutes, it's just like this over here, right? You are taking away the sense of rising upwards, right? So you're sort of spoiling the surprise by giving us flutes up here, right? Da da da. Couldn't this be on the oboes an octave lower, and just cut this? And then everybody yada da 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 da. That way we didn't put this over here. And then, and it's sort of just like what happens to the music, it in the piano part, just like you have in most of the scoring, it rises beautifully up to here, and then it descends beautifully. What are these guys doing? They're ruining the beautiful contour. I mean, you can see it on the page. It's like this beautiful mountain, right? Right? Get rid of these messy looking crags and trees and so on, right? Just make it a big, beautiful peak and kind of going back down, right? Like the Kosciuszkos or whatever. Okay. So yeah, like, so I think, like, that about the only big concern here, like you've got your sort of triple octave in the in your winds, and then you sort of cleverly telescope here into the string line, and then and once again bringing in other things. I think it's a real interesting approach right in here. And the doubling, yeah. So you don't need this here. Maybe oboe's an octave lower. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just a real nice natural use, except for these little things that stick out. It's just a really nice natural use of registers, I think, and nice dynamics as they are written across. I don't think you need to. I don't think this needs to be mezzo piano against the first violin's piano. I think everybody should be the same dynamic. Just make everybody piano. You'll be fine. It's better. I think it's better to blend with the strings than to have them stand out because you already have got the clarinet, right? All right, and then this just is all really great. And I like this right in here, right? Introducing the clarinet solo. All right, so now jumping ahead to C2. We've got the clarinet just taking the da 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 and really nice little bits of accompaniment from bassoons. I don't think you need any flute in here at all. Right? Just let your clarinet say everything. But if you insist on doubling it, make this an eighth note. All right. This is kind of neat though. This little and I would just make it an eighth note. Da 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 da. I just just like I'm not sure about the oboe in here. I mean, I see what you're doing. You're kind of focusing the energy so that this is nice and rich and reedy, right? But maybe you don't need this here at all, right? And then once again, you're giving away the surprise. But put this note down here. Put these three notes down here an octave lower. Da 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 and get rid of this oboe here. Maybe have them come in here. Right? Don't pile up, right? You want that big beautiful curve, right? Da 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 da. Yeah, get rid of this. Just let it be what it is. Don't pile things on top of it. Just because that way you get this big, beautiful line. This, the clarinet going into that kind of hooting lower register all by itself. It doesn't need. It doesn't not need any distractions. Hang on. Does not need any distractions above it and below it, right? And then, of course, there's this little mistake right in here. Okay, well, so speaking of jumping around, we're going to jump forwards now and look at, like we've been looking at all the way that things recap. So we're really going to look at some more recapping now and see how the recapitulations at E, and then we'll come back and we'll look at how you manage D. All right. Okay, so forward to E. Right, and here we got, we see really kind of a, pretty much, very similar, not identical, but very similar scoring to what happened before. Right. Da, 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 da. What if you cut this up here and you rearranged the first violin to harmonize? Maybe like this part here was scored in a certain way, like maybe inverted. So instead of like F thirds, you had like instead of F thirds, you had like an A sixth or something like that, or just some other kind of way of doing it. And you had your clarinet an octave higher, right? Da, 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 da. Right, but of course you wouldn't want to take it too high. Da, 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 da. I don't know, but it's just like maybe is it possible to make this recapitulation a little different from what happened before? Of course, I don't mean to sort of butt in here and say, okay, do this and do that, but whatever. But is there some way of refreshing the material right in here? Yeah. Do you have any sudden leaps of inspiration about this? Way of reinterpreting it. I do like the introduction. I think that's very, very cool. Just one little thought about it. Maybe these pitches right in here could be either played divisi and cellos or could be covered by viola, right? And the viola could end with this, just kind of taking the F and the A and so on. Just like maybe these 4 pitches here or 5 pitches here could be doubled by violas, just to keep things nice and just perfectly smooth. Okay. Da, 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 da. It's very cool to have the clarinet in there. Yeah, very cool. What if this was inverted, or like kind of a different position, and you went ba 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 da ya, right? So instead of going written C E A C C, what if you just harmonized with a line? So it was like up a sixth, right? So what if you went like A C E A C C D D? That just like really lead up to it, right? Then here, increased dynamic impact. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good orchestration of what's in the score. It's very kind of cool the way that this is all scored together. Of course, like your solo part is going to get completely swallowed up by everything else, so it's just going to become a core instrument at that point. That's fine. Right, and then arg. Sorry. Yeah, and just finding nice things for you to do with your clarinet. Fix these little trillos, okay, the tuning and so on of the of the note that's being trilled up to. Yeah, and then all of these. Yeah, you get rid of the 2D and solo things. Everybody knows what's going on here. Yeah, that's. Yeah, I mean, that all works for me. I like the ritardando here. Right. Once again, correct the harmony in there. And then this is really similar to what we saw. And this is actually, I think, even more effective, the doubling of the flute with the oboe here. The second flute, right? Because it's, it's they're functionally tied together while the first flute is doing something completely different, right? I would make this slur over the top. Yeah, and in horns, it's going to be hard to get this to be piano at that level, but it's all it. It's aspirational. Yeah, some of these things I would want you to check with your clarinets just to see how long they can keep certain things up. You know what I mean? I guess, yeah. It's not something that I would necessarily score myself, but I might score something that was this challenging. Yeah, I mean, it's like keeping it perfectly even, and regular, and then kind of getting into places where, like, where do you breathe and so on. Even with these little rests and so on, like, is there enough time to really take a meaningful breath and so on. Yeah, I mean, I think it's more or less playable. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I feel that also works. The da 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 da. Yeah. And then yeah, and this boo 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 doo 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 doo. Yeah. Yeah, and that goes pretty damn high up to the G. Yeah, it's gonna be way squeakier than you might think. But I mean, look, I mean, it is a part of the clarinet's range. It's usable and it's kind of fun. You know, throwing in the occasional high G's. Yeah, okay, but it's going to be very piercing. Here, there's not going to be a big problem balancing. This is my mistake, by the way. This was pointed out to me. This should be forte followed by fortissimo. Just for some reason, I got those mixed up in my template. So, yeah. So make everything gradual to end on a fortissimo. All right. And then here, we have kind of similar to what we saw before. Makes these eighth notes and so on. And yeah, just drop this to the oboes an octave lower if you need them. Da da da. Don't do this. And then, so you like this, once again, this not only spoils the line as you descend, but it also spoils these notes coming in nice and softly. Bum, bum. Right? So you don't need this, and you don't need this, or maybe this could be oboes an octave lower, supporting the violins. And I really love the sort of like throwing all that stuff here to the clarinet, right? And then here you just like here you get to a cadenza, and I would really have loved like the last piece also had a cadenza, had a place for a cadenza in it, but there was no cadenza written out, so. I don't know if you want to leave that to your soloist or you want to write it out yourself, or but just make it really interesting and make it referential to what happened before. But don't make it slavishly just like replaying the material, right? I think that I mentioned in the last evaluation how I wrote a cadenza for the middle chord progression. It's just two chords of the third Brandenburg, which was originally like it's some people actually play it this way, like the strings play the two chords and then the harpsichordist like improvises and then they play the two chords at the end. And so what I did was I wrote out an improvisation style solo for the harpsichordist of this one virtuoso strings group. And and it was just like it was a bunch of Bach-like ideas, but treating the material of the outside movements of the Brandenburg 3, to, giving it the treatment of these other concepts by Bach, right? And my idea was, like, if C.P. Bach were at the continuo position and he was playing this and his dad was in the audience and he wanted to, like, tease his dad with a bunch of, like, see, like, how clever he could get, just imagining Bach in the audience going, oh no, and then maybe, like, every once in a while going, oh well, but that's not a bad idea, right? that was my concept, right? So that's a pretty good approach, I think, to writing a cadenza. Don't just replay all the material, but reinterpret it and just elevate it and elevate it and elevate it, right? So, but by the time the player comes in, right, I would say if you have your cadenza like this, though, coming out of it, and then you have this, these bars here, and then it's a very active part from there on. Give them a little breath, Da, da, you do know what I'm saying? So just like whatever, just set up this trill, right, with a breath before it. So they have lots of time to re-oxygenate to go into this, right? So don't just have like like by the time they get to here, they just have no breath left, right? So just make sure whatever happens here, there's tons of time to breathe going into this trill. Okay. And then, just, da 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 da, It's funny, you come out of this and then you go back into the just real soft. Toot, toot, toot. And I really love the way that you play off of it with your little lines in here, right? Yeah, and once again, just accents. Bum, 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 bum. Yeah. You need to be going like fortissimo by the time you get to here, right? And a nice fortissimo Charlemagne register ending, that'll just cut through everything the way that you've got it scored. Just really watch out about too much brass in the making the brass really big. I mean, it's good that you're trying to keep the brass away from the middle register down here. So just watch out about it. Okay. Okay, so now let's go back and look at D. Wow, this is a big one. Okay. Okay, you know what? I mean, is there any way you could reinterpret this so that you what if you ended up walking down to this and you ended up on the D? I'm sorry. Do you know what I mean? Is there some way to goose this a little bit so that whatever happens, you are walking down to it rather than walking down and then leaping up, right? Or can you reinterpret this so that's can you incorporate that little dotted rhythm in it, into it, so we really feel this happening. This, like, it's coming into being rather than just suddenly da 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 da. I like the mezzo staccato here in the strings. It's really nice. Da, 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 da. give yourself a little Nachschlag here, right? Da 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 da. And don't forget to put the flat over the top of this. Yeah, nice. Just like giving the clarinet something to do here. That's really nice. And yeah, and then coming in strong, bum, ba bum. I would start the crescendo earlier. Okay, and go ahead. I would say in the bass notes or the bass register, crescendo to a forte here, and then just leave it forte, and everybody else come in over it. Yeah, and better just to leave the soloist out here, right? Yeah, and once again, you've got an enclosure of oboes and flutes. I mean, do you even need the the second flute here? Why not just have like maybe you have your harmony here, but then just go to a duet here and just just have that over the harmony here. Right. Yeah, and this is lovely. Da 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 bum bum bum. Da da da. I thought you handled this really well. This stuff was all good. Yeah, except for maybe like the second flute part in here. I mean, it's passable. It's all right. It's just yeah. That looks like the lower you push it, the less effective. Right? You're getting into B and then A. Right. And then here, da 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 da, like the flute's kind of useless down here on some of these lower notes. And seeing as how you were already combining clarinet there. I mean, leave it alone, leave it the way that it is, but just be aware it's like that, not as effective as it could be. I mean, I understand you want the sort of the triple sound, right, of like these three instruments put together. I mean, it's all right. They're I wish there was some other little voice you could stick in here. You've got like you've already have like violins, right? I mean, the violins could take the place completely of the flutes right in here, if you wanted, right? And I also see what you're trying to do here is like you're trying to complete the phrase for the clarinetist who is going to be dropping out to take a breath here and then jump up. I mean, I get it. I totally get it. So leave it the way that it is, but just be aware that it's not ideal. I'm a little. I like the brass right in here. I'm a little. I'm of two minds about this. I wonder if you could just go a duet down to this C, and then a duet flutes going up to this G, an octave lower, right? Rather than this. This just feels a little sort of concert bandish. You're kind of stacking all this on top, right? Rather than more orchestral or concerto like. Yeah, this other stuff, yeah, it's all good. Yeah, that's all fine. Okay, so, all right, so, wow, um, yeah, quite a quite an intense evaluation on this first movement. The second one is going to go a little smoother, I think. Um, it's not just the fact that you kind of duplicated or you kind of reorchestrated a repeat. But it's also that just the intensity of this and then all the special care that has to be taken for a concerto type kind of arrangement and so on. But look, it was totally worth it. I had no regrets here. Just a little concern about really taking a long time to go over this first movement. But I mean, still, just such great ideas. And if I'm picking it apart and saying, is this the right idea? Have you thought of doing this a different way? Is there any way to reorchestrate this or whatever? If I'm really taking the time to go over it, Noel, it's because I think it's really worth going over. I think that, like as you say, you've got a soloist interested in it, and that's a really great thing because like those people, a lot of times very motivated soloists can get you, can get your piece programmed, right? It's happened to me several times. And then you get yourself a premiere, and then maybe the work gets played more and more from there. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy with this, and if any of my suggestions are useful, please incorporate them as you see fit. Yeah, it's just very inviting and fun take on it and so on, and you had asked whether or not we could possibly have a session looking at the second movement, and I'm happy to do that maybe in the coming year. Let's see if we can get this completely in shape, ready for the stands and all of the movements and everything like that. All right. Okay, so we need an intermission after that, right? Let's stop now with with huge thanks to Noel, for your patience and for your the excellent effort that you put into this, and just the best of wishes for this to get programmed, or get performed and recorded. And if it gets recorded, as with any of these works, and gets stuck on YouTube, send us a link. I will announce it in the group. Wonderful work, so fun, such an original take on it. Really has it's more than just you taking the music and making it work for a solo clarinet. I just really see your voice, your vision in this. What makes Noel, right? I can clearly see that in you, and the proportions and all the other things, and the colors and some of the dramatic choices and so on. So yeah, fantastic work. All right, so let's take a break, and we'll come back to this after the intermission. In yesterday's intermission to Dean's Orchestration Challenge Evaluation, we took a look at Debussy's use of slurred tremolos. Today, let's take one last look at that approach, in both his works and those of composers he influenced. Debussy applies slurs to tremolos in several key areas of la mer, seamlessly connecting pairs of tones, and grouping certain thematic ideas in very subtle ways. Most of these examples appear in the second movement, but there's quite an extended passage in the third movement, between rehearsal numbers 54 and 56, in which many different approaches of tremolo are scored, many times slurred, and even one case of slurred pizzicato. Debussy was to continue on this path in his next and last major orchestral work, in the Iberia movement of his Image for orchestra. Other composers whom he influenced also employed slurred tremolos here and there, such as Vaughan Williams in his C Symphony. And Lili Boulanger in several of her works, particularly in one haunting passage of her Prix de Rome winning cantata, Faust et Hélène, in which divisi second violins play unison lines in both slurred tremolo and slurred pizzicato. This is framed by sul tasto muted violas on an F7 flat 5 chord, and decorated by rippling quasi-glissando harps, all in accompaniment to a sweetly eerie oboe solo. The perfect smoothness of the little slurred tremolo figuration keeps the mood in a state of tranquil unsettledness. One last aspect of this topic is that some composers use the convention only to express that a certain position or placement of a tone was to be moved around in glissando, while maintaining tremolo bowing or rolling percussion. Thus we see the middle strings in Ravel's Scheherazade overture, sliding up from pitch to pitch under slurs. Or, if we interpret the trill mark over timpani to have the same essential meaning as tremolo slashes, then we can interpret the pedal glissandos and the timpani battle of Nielsen's Fourth Symphony in the same way. Over on Patreon, I've posted text versions of both tips on tied and slurred tremolos, with a list of further works to study by Debussy and Lili Boulanger. But now, let's jump back to Noel's wonderfully potent and fascinating clarinet concerto interpretation of Beethoven's 24th Piano Sonata. All right, now we're back. Oh boy, this is really, really a fun movement. And there's a lot of stuff that's really right about it. And then there's some things that I think I can really help you fix about it. And once again, I was I was kind of mock griping a little bit about the length that the first movement was taking. And please don't take that personally at all, or as me being extra annoyed at at you orchestrating one of the repeats and so on. It is okay. I'm really happy to do it, and it's just really just a joyous exercise here. Really wonderful, and I especially really love about how you use a kind of late classical pre clarinet as part of the section, kind of an approach here to your winds, right? Just flutes, oboes, and bassoons filling in the space. I think it's done very, very well, and just giving room for the solo clarinet to do its thing. Okay, so there's a lot about this that I really, really love. There are some things that I'll probably critique a bit in terms of like some of your ideas, some of your proportions and things. But for the most part, this is very, very solid, and I would say like technically, especially at your tempo of 130, it's pretty playable. There's some things like I think there are a few things like this. I think is there one place where you go to octaves? I seem to remember. Anyway, yeah. So, and this is nice too. This little thing here. I think I did a little bit of kind of reshaping your original score. I might have done something like that. I did that in a few situations, just to make things fit a little bit better. I think I sort of shrunk it vertically and sort of changed a few things around. Yeah. So I mean, it's just I feel it's really solid. Like there are far fewer questions that I've got about this compared to what I saw in the first movement, which of course it is only fair because that first movement is it really is a developed sonata allegro, and turning that into like a concerto allegro is really quite difficult, I think. So yeah, once again, really, really nice. So let's get straight to the general enhanced evaluation comments. All right, so with all that said, there are a lot of wrong notes in the solo part, and I'm wondering how that happened. Like if you were copy pasting or dropping in bits and pieces of melodic line from the original piano score here into, like, I think this is Muse score. How could that happen? How could it possibly happen that these notes would turn out wrong, unless maybe you corrected them, thinking that would be the right way to go rather than the wrong way, or I don't know what. But anyways, it's just something I need to think about for future orchestration challenges. So I'm going to go over a lot of these corrections in the bar by bar evaluations, and please note that for the solo clarinet part anyways, they are in the transposed pitches, not the sounding pitches, right? The written pitches. So if I tell you to change something to say like an E flat, then that's E flat as written, right? Right, not as sounding for your clarinet in B flat. So just like what it will look like on the page, right? Rather than sounding. Okay, so the biggest problem for your solo clarinet part is the absorptive quality of the strings and the brass. Now, like for instance, when you have things like this with winds, the clarinet has a chance of standing out more, I would say, unless you really want it to become part of the choir here, right? And that's perfectly fine too. However, there are parts where like right in here you've got some doubling with your with the first violins, and it's not hard to make the clarinet stand out a bit, right? See here you've got this marked like piano versus mezzo piano, right? So it will stand out. However, there's a chance when the strings or the brass get stronger that the clarinet part will get absorbed, because that is kind of what its role is, right? There's a wonderful quality of clarinet that I notice a lot of orchestrators, whether developing or accomplished, don't seem to realize that the clarinet is used as a way of thickening and intensifying the strings without being a voice into themselves, right? So it's similar to bassoon as well, right? So bassoon can intensify lower strings without being an element of that, like bassoon, an audible bassoon part plus the strings, right? So a beautiful merging blend that is still very string heavy. So that's the problem. It's not so bad in this case because you're in kind of the lower clarino register, a bit of throat tone here and there, but the clarino register has a tendency to speak out, which is not such a bad idea. However, the big question is when the solo line is in the Chalumeau register, and it's at a strong dynamic against winds and brass. All right, so here are a few examples for you. Okay, so let's jump forward to 9D. Right. So this part right here, da 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 da. Right in here, the clarinet part is definitely going to get sucked into the violins. It doesn't matter if you mark this up to mezzo piano or not. Mezzo forte is where you would have to be, right? And then here, da da da. This will speak, right? Because it's in the clarino register. But then down here, da 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 da. This will get once again sucked in if it's not mezzo forte. Now here, bum bum bum. This will speak over the horns. It'll have a tendency to get absorbed into the flutes a bit, right? So you could mark this up to forte if you wanted to. If you really wanted it to be out in front of all of this sound, right? But then right in here, there was this one place that I thought, it's not here. I'll show you. Jumping ahead to 151, we have a sort of a sister passage. Like this is scored very similarly. So the same problem here. This would have to come up to mezzo forte to stand out against the strings. And then here, I feel that this is perfect. Mezzo forte against piano, winds, and brass. So maybe you could do that in the other place if you wanted it to have this level of balance, which I feel is very nicely done. Now, there are a couple of other little problems. And that is, like, to really get this one note at bar 61 to stand out. This will have to kind of hoot. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a ooh, kind of almost like a barn owl or something like that. Actually, I'm wrong. Screech owls hoot and barn owls screech. So screech owl. But anyways, it'll have to be an owl-like hoot on this low note, just like a boom. So you might want to mark this. And especially if you bring in, like as I'm going to suggest. If you bring in timpani or something like that, I think like I don't think you need to mark it up to fortissimo, but maybe sforzando, right? Sforzando with an accent or sforzando with a marcato, something like that. But just boom. All right, now speaking of brass and timpani, let's jump back. So if we accept everything that we accepted in movement one, that you are really kind of scoring this in a more of a romantic idiom with the way that you're using, for all the for all that this is good late classical scoring with flutes, oboes, and bassoons, and no section clarinets. Still, your pitch choices in your horns and trumpets pretty much are mean that they are going to be chromatic, and if they're going to be chromatic, this is middle. This is sort of middle to late romantic era scoring, and if that is true, then by golly, you should bring in more trumpets and more horns as you need them. If there's any place where you're holding back because you felt, oh well, I just I don't want to, I don't want to not sound classical, forget about it. Use them where you need to use them. Okay, not a lot more, but just a little bit more, right? I've got it in my notes here. Not a lot more, but some more, right? There's some more that you could do here. Um, but I think that like the timpani is what I really am more concerned about. Okay, and that is like once again you just have two pitches, a F and a C, and you could. I just feel you are robbing yourself of you could be bringing in timpani more coming towards the ends of these big tutti kinds of things. Boom, down a little boom. There's no boom here, right? You could give me an A here, or or whatever, right? Whatever pitch you feel that you can tune to, right? Um, and then like on the episodes, especially on the episodes, let's see, jump back a bit. It's difficult because you've scored them in a way that's quite different. Yeah, so here, like we could have a nice solid D here, boom, so here's another place where you could mark this as a sforzando, possibly, right? Yeah. So just some more timpani, some more brass if you need it. And then just some very minor stuff. Once again, this is trying to get your stuff ready for the stands, ready to be looked at as a conductor. You have a soloist who's interested in this. The soloist possibly might have a conductor friend of theirs who might want to feature them in a performance, and here's a chance to do that. Right? That's how I got. That's how I got performed in several situations. So yeah, so like watch out for stem directions, like right here, like just put this right. These obviously these are, I don't know how music score works, but whatever you did, you reversed them here. This isn't a huge problem. There's another big one though, 173. Where is it? Yeah, bar 173 in the horns. Right, so right here on beat one. So yeah, so things like that. Just really check to make sure that you don't have your stems going the wrong direction. Okay, and then speaking of stems, try to like normalize the amount of beam slashes at allegro, right? For both this movement and the previous movement, all you need is 3. You don't need 4. Maybe you needed 4 in order to activate the right sound on the sound set that MuseScore is using. Okay, correct it back to 3. And then one of the problems that I saw in movement 1 was that you had a lot of enclosures of flute 2 by oboes, right? Or doublings of flute 2 by oboes. Okay, so it's not as big of a problem here because you have much more separation for the most part in your oboes and flutes, which is really the way to go with this kind of scoring. However, there are a few places where you get very close in those parts, and that leaves you with some problems to fix, right? So, for instance, here, right, try to not do this. Stack, don't enclose, right? So this should be G and C. This should be E and C and E, right? Another example is 51, right? So same exact idea here. So this should be A and C sharp, and this would be should be C sharp and E. Try not to do that thing. So that would be perfect for clarinets and flutes. Excuse me, clarinets and oboes. It's perfect for clarinets and oboes. Try not to do it with clarinets and flutes or oboes and flutes. Stack, okay. I should do a tip about this. Well, I mean, my don't bury your flutes covers this, so yeah. And then there's some places where you could just score the flutes a deux, right? So here's an example. There are a few other examples of this. I'll give you a couple here, and then you can just proofread the rest. So, for instance, like right here, like this. Why not just have flutes a deux and then just let this F-E-E thing be just the oboes, right? So, ba-da-dun, right? And then, where's another one? 165 to 67, right? So here, like, right in here, you've got your second flute getting down towards the border of invisibility, right? And even if it weren't, it would still be better for this passage if these pitches just stood on their own and you didn't double the top pitch with flute 2 and you just made this a deux on top, right? All the way through to, I guess, right here, right? So just make all this a deux, and then you don't have to worry about the fact that you're missing an instruction to the conductor and the parts preparer whether or not this is both instruments or one instrument, which is another thing that you've left out, right? All right, so that's my general enhanced evaluation. I'm gonna try to keep this a little quicker and not sort of dither over it so much. Okay. So now, enhanced evaluation bar by bar. Okay, so there are a ton of little errors, and I'm going to point them out quickly, and I try not to like get too stuck on it. All right, so this starts at bar 59. Okay, so here, like this is the sort of the the kind of worrying doubts section, right? Boom, worrying doubts. Okay, so the thing about the worrying doubts is that they are in D minor when you are transposing this to F. And this is sounding F sharp. So you have this major third trilling here, and you have the rest of the orchestra attempting to convey the fact that it is minor. And this is a G natural, right? Which, like in this situation, you would want to put a cautionary, right, accidental here, right, so the player doesn't think, well, this is supposed to be G sharp too, correct, right? Because there's a G sharp here. Why isn't this G? So yeah, work out your cautionaries, proofread for that too. I didn't write it down in the notes, but you should be doing that in any case, right? So what you need to do here is either trill on a G natural sounding F natural from the second quaver of beat 1. All right, starting like a quaver late, right? So either do that, don't play this at all, just start here with your trill on a G natural, or start your trill on G natural, start your trill on G sharp, change to a G natural here. And I would say also maybe a little like drop from forte to mezzo piano or something like that, right? To sort of reflect this the kind of the quieter kind of neurotic thing happening here. All right. Okay, but the fun doesn't end there, because same situation is happening here at 63. All right. And then this is also supposed to be a G natural trill, right? Sounding F natural, because these are all F naturals, right? F natural, F natural, F natural, right? This is fine. This D sharp trill. Okay, and then these are all good. All right, so now let's jump ahead to 80. All right, so there are a bunch of weird little errors in this this little flight of fancy here. Right? So, for instance, okay, so hang on a second. Okay, second semiquaver of beat 1. We need an E flat, right? You know what? The problem is that, like, when I was redoing this page, I stupidly didn't give myself a starting. So that's okay. 70, 71 to 78, 79. Okay. Yeah. All right. So here's the problem. Sorry about that. Okay. And you know what? And this sort of seems wrong to me. So if this is all right, well, look, I'll just go with it. I'll just go with it and not worry about it. Okay. But like this should be an E flat, right? Okay, so there's just like a lot of, like I said, there are a lot of little teeny errors and so on. Okay, now let's jump ahead to 116. So isn't this supposed to be like, intended to be like G3? Because like this E doesn't make any sense in context with the rest of the passage, right? And of course, here's another place where you could throw in a timpani stroke, right? Boom. And then we have the same problem that we had before at at 63 and 57 or whatever, is that this should be, we've got like a sounding A, which should be a sounding A flat, right? From the second quaver, right? So same exact thing. Either don't come in on the downbeat, come in on the second quaver on a B flat trill, right? Sounding A flat, or start with a B natural and then change to B flat trill, and and maybe once again just give ourselves maybe just a teeny bit of diminution. I would say don't go down to piano. Maybe go down to like maybe mezzo forte or mezzo piano, just to let the doubts worry a little bit more rather than just dominating them so much. Okay, yeah, and then sforzando. I would say Mark Sforzando, marcato, right here, right? Perhaps. Okay, so and then the same thing is same exact thing here, right? All right, so now we've got a few problems here in these trills. So all right, so from 123. So 123, beat 2, you should have a flat sign over the trill, right? Because you're going to be trilling up to an E flat to stay with the whole essence of the F minor here, right? So in F minor, unless or G minor, transpose G minor. So transpose G minor. If you trill up to E, that is an implied Dorian, right? Dorian mode, and there's nothing about this that is an implied Dorian, right? And then there's, let's see, going to 124, beat 2, a flat sign over this, right? Because we're going to be trilling up to, from G up to A flat, sounding G up to A flat, written A up to B flat. So like here's your A flat, right? So you don't want to be trilling to a sounding A natural when you have an A flat in the other parts, right? And then, once again, so this is the same problem as here. Change this to an E flat so that you don't change it in, so that the tonality here isn't Dorian in your clarinet, all right? All right, 133. There's a bad note here. This should be an A flat in your oboe, not an A natural. And then at 140, let's see, do I have this right? Oh, I see. I'm miscounting. I apologize. All right, so 131, 140. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so these should be D flats, correct? All right, because we have the D flat over here. So these should both be D flats, the fourth semiquaver of both beats. Okay, and then 148. Okay, so B flat. This needs to be a B flat. This is a B flat. That should be a B flat, right? Yeah. So just there's a lot of proofreading you didn't do here. So I'm kind of wondering why these little errors crept in, and I wonder if it was that you were playing it in maybe rather than copy pasting. All right, so 150. There's another problem here. This D flat should be a D flat here as well, right? Not a enharmonically C sharp. Now, you've got some really high horn scoring here. This top C is going to scream. Okay, give this to the trumpet players, right? There's no need for this to be played with horn. In fact, it'll be a nice bright color to accompany the strings and so on, right? So it's just shuffle that over to copy paste that, or cut and paste that over to the trumpets. All right, 181. Yeah, okay, so here you have a situation where the chord change is on the last quaver of the bar, not in the middle of the bar, right? So this has to stay D flat. So just leave this D flat. Don't change it to a D natural in anticipation, because you just set up a conflict with the harmony that is happening at the same time, right? Yeah, let me jump back. There are a couple of things that I got out of order on my list. Okay, so you cannot have this kind of scoring, right? Maybe you were going to fix this later. This should be two voice scoring, right? With the stem in the first part coming down to this F, and the stem in the second part coming up to the F, right? So implying that there are two parts, right? Because otherwise you have this, and then you write a due and this, and you write a due and so on, a due every other, and that's ridiculous. So just have two parts, right? With G, F, G, C in voice 1, and then this E, F, E, C in voice 2, right? So just split. Okay, so right here, this is very awkward harmony. Throwing in this A in here, like sounding A, and this written E, it just does not fit the harmony of what's going on here. Take this bar and move it up diatonically up a third, right? So starting with a written G third, da 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 da, right? So just, yeah, have it go up, right? And then take these A's and change them into C's, right? And I guarantee that'll immediately fix your problem. And maybe that's what you intended all along. I don't know. Okay. All right, now let's go back forward to 178. So trilling on a G at the end implies a resolution. Okay, but the entrance of the orchestra is where the resolution is, following a cadenza. The last trill in a cadenza is always the leading tone, right? Or maybe the fifth sometimes, right? So it would be better for this to be a trill on an F sharp, da, or da, or on the fifth, da, so like trill E down to D, day, right? Or trill. It could also be like the second, right? So trilling onto the, from B down to A, right, and so on. So like there are a bunch of different strategies that you could do here, but like, and then maybe either resolve it here, or just do a pausa and then let the orchestra resolve it, right? But resolving it on the trill is not common practice, right? So this is all common practice, right? You just be really careful when you twist it, right? Okay. Yeah, and here's another example of something that needs to be fixed. You have second flute covered by first oboe. Or second oboe. There's no way. This second flute is complete waste. It's not contributing anything at all. It would be better for you to have flutes a deux and oboes a deux. Flutes a deux on top, oboes a deux on the bottom, right? Because it would just be less clumsy, right? And just leave it, all the way up to here. High F a deux, low F a deux. All right, now one last little comment here is, this is the kill your darlings phase. Okay, it's really cute. It's really clever for you to end this, with a callback to Beethoven's Sixth Symphony. Okay, please don't take this the wrong way, but my advice is to avoid this if you want more than one performance, right? If you want this clarinet player to champion your work, take it all over the place, orchestra after orchestra, get it recorded, all this other kind of stuff. If you want a greater, longer life for your work, rethink this ending, right? Because the way that it is now, it's like I hate saying this where I really don't want you to take this the wrong way and feel that I am disrespecting you in any ways, but it's gimmicky, okay? It's a thing where people go, ha ha ha, that was funny. But they won't be saying, oh my God, did you hear the way that ended? It was like Beethoven, only like Beethoven having a new idea, right? So if that's the truth, then you can't reuse Beethoven's ideas from before, right? It's okay to end in a Beethoven style, but don't end exactly like Beethoven ended. All right. So like once again, seriously, I don't want you to think that I am, taking a dump on your idea. I think it's really really kind of fun. But I think that like if you want this to be a serious work that is played frequently, the best chance you have of giving it more life is to end it in a way that is original, right? Rather than a callback. Maybe you could just do this a couple of times. Something like that. Do you know what I mean? Just rethink this ending if you possibly can. And you don't have to pay attention to my idea. Like, just maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, so let's jump back. Okay, and let's do the fun part. The our evaluation criteria. All right, so our first concern here was, do shifts of dynamics and registers imply a contrast of texture? And of course, I mean, that's such an obvious thing that maybe I didn't even need to mention it, but it is a basic thing, so of course, right? So, bum, 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 do, 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 do. I think that's a very cool thing, just, like especially adding timpani and so on. Is there opportunity to bring in the trumpets in here? Possibly, to make it a full tutti. But then, of course, you sacrifice your clarinet part. But maybe you don't need your clarinet part in these two things, right? Maybe it's like, since it's going to be difficult to hear it anyways, why just even have it play at all? Why not have the trumpets instead? Bum bum bum, and then the clarinet answers at mezzo forte. Boo boo doo boo boo. And then everybody, including the trumpets, but no solo clarinet. Bum bum bum, doo 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 doo. Right. So it's a good way of bringing in the trumpets, and then leaving out what would be invisible in the clarinet playing. And this is really lovely right in here. I think you should include the clarinet, but maybe continue mezzo forte here, mezzo forte there, mezzo forte here. Right, continuing on. That way it just stands out a bit more better. I think this is a situation where you could possibly use my idea of meno a tempo, right? So da 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 da, right, just to give it a teeny bit of restraint, like what's going on here? It is a rondo. Do you know what I mean? Okay. And then our next concern is this smooth rather than awkward? And I really like the way that you have slurred your clarinet in here. That really helps things out a lot. And then just and then this is very straightforward scoring here with a and these could all be abbreviated if you wanted to. Just give us the first 16 or the first four 16th notes, the first four semiquavers, and then you could go to an abbreviation. Just a quarter note with two slashes, right? And a staccato mark over it. And I really love the answer, right? By your flutes and bassoons in a triple octave, double octave. Yeah, and then just answering, right? Yeah, just very, very lovely. And then, pushing forwards here. It's funny that, you don't have any horns. Could there have been horns here? Could there have been a little bit of timpani? So you get a boom. All right, but we'll talk about this, right? Actually, we'll talk a little bit about it now. Yeah, I really don't have any problem with this orchestration here. But I just wonder whether or not you could bring in horns, like maybe just like a horn pad behind the growing energy here, just to bring a little color in, and then bam, along with a bit of timpani on the C. Right? And yeah, and I'm totally approve of all of this, especially like the little dissonance, right, with the E, right? The E's against the like against the resolution, right, or the passing tone. Sorry, I meant to say. Yeah. It's just so great because it's just going to sound like scrunch, scrunch, scrunch. It's sort of like squishing bugs. Yeah, very, very cool. And yeah, I like all of this. It goes on for a bit, but it's still fun. Some of this, I just check with your soloist. It's very soloistic, and it's good that you're giving your player a chance to breathe here, right? And once again, I feel you could bring in your trumpets here, right? Ba ba bum, and then the same thing here, mezzo forte, bum ba da 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 da. And yeah, and once again, trumpets, da da da, no clarinet, da 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 da, mezzo forte on your clarinet, and then this is the same as before, right? Oh well, we'll get into that. In fact, let's go back now, and let's look at what you were doing. Okay, so I had suggested trumpets and giving your solo clarinet a break, and then coming in mezzo forte, right? And you pretty much, this little wind chorale. So pretty much, it just really looks like you're doing the same thing again, right? Like here, this da 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 bum 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 bum, right? Yeah. So if we jump ahead to double E. All right, we just really kind of see the same thing except for the little timpani stroke here. Da da boom, da 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 da, da da boom, da 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 da. You have the strings positioned a little bit lower, right? Which I think is very very cool. But once again, mezzo forte on your clarinets. Keep it at mezzo forte, and I would say make these piano like you do in the following section, right? And this is so cool right in here. Boop, 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 boom. Maybe you don't need first bassoon here. Maybe all you need is just your solo clarinet, right? Just make it into a 4-part harmony here. Okay, and then 150. All right, and then you're just kind of taking the same approach again. Da da boom, da 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 da. Yeah, just to point out, if you have more kettles, then you have more options for whatever low note you want to hit. Yeah, and once again, you've got a chance to bring in, like, you have such little going on with your trumpets, right? It might be a good place to bring them in places like this. And then see here this mezzo forte against this stuff, and you could once again leave out the first bassoon and just let this be 4-part harmony, and it's just much clearer for your soloist and gives them more of a chance for leadership, right? Okay, so those are the first half of our main themes, right? So let's go back and look at the second half of the main theme and compare. There are 3 different instances of that, and then of course the fourth one is the coda, right? And then we had talked about this before, how like this needed to be smooth rather than awkward. There needed to be sort of textural and dynamic expansion, which you did really, really well. And I really like the call and response that you've got going on between clarinet and upper winds. And I think that if you're going to pull back here with your strings, you can pull back with your winds too, right? Especially like if you like putting an accent here and you've got a mezzo piano entrance with your clarinets, not a good thing. Just diminuendo, let them end, and then then the clarinet's entrance is not stomped on so much, right? See, you're stomping on it. You're not diminuendoing. Okay. Right. Okay. So that's all fine. All right. Then if we jump forward and we just sort of look like what was the treatment's pretty much identical, right? There's a few tiny little changes. Yeah. Yeah. So that's all good. All right. And then let's jump ahead to bar 100. Yeah, and then there's I like there's a little bit of shifting around in here with the harmony in the strings, and I think that's that is needed. But of course, like everything else is pretty much the same. And there's a little bit of trumpet in here too, right? Maybe there are places where you could like have trumpets. Maybe the trumpets could be playing here could be playing this part too in the horns instead of the horns, right? Yeah, just give them more interesting things to do, and maybe like everybody could kaboom here at the end, all four brass players, right? Okay, so those are our the second half of the of the main theme. So now let's take a look at the at our connecting passages, right? So we already took a look at this, and I thought that it was very fun the way that we were getting the dissonance by playing the playing the the resolving tone at the same time as the passing tone in the solo instrument, right? That was all very, very fun. Okay, and yeah, and I really liked all of this. Just very, very cool. Leaving all of the sort of scatterbrained silliness to the clarinet player, right? That's totally cool. All right, and then the next passage is like the downward dipping passage, right? This. So here, normalize your beams. Okay. Just make it easier on the player to read, because like when they have this kind of these divided beams and so on. This is of course just left over probably from copy pasting the part over from the source score. That's fine, but just normalize your beams, okay? Yeah, and then yeah, this all works great. Boom. Yeah, add some timpani here. And you could also add a little bit of warmth behind the orchestra, like behind the orchestra and your trumpets here. Right, da da da. It's another place where you could bring in trumpets because they're just really underused. And we talked about this, right? We'll get into the episodes in a minute. All right. So here's the next connecting passage, which has got like a built-in pausa, right? Boom. And once again, you could have a little G flat or, some other related tone right in here, or maybe a D flat in your timpani. Because I just really feel it needs something boom, right? And you could put fortissimo in your brass parts here. All right, now once again, normalize the beam groups. Yeah, and this is all fine. Yeah, just depends on in this boop dum bum 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 bum. Yeah, that's all good. And then the let's jump ahead to 110. Yeah, this is really similar to before. And normalize the beam groups. Boom. This is really great going into the the Chalumeau register here. And then, and just end on a G, right? Boom. And, maybe even give it like a sforzando marcato accent. Sforzando below, marcato accent above. Just really hoot. All right, and we'll talk about the episodes in a minute. All right, and that just leaves the last and longest connecting passage here. And and I don't know, this is starting to sound like a broken record, but yeah, normalize your beam groups. And there's a bunch of stuff in here to correct. Yeah, and I really like the fact that there's no accompaniment here. It's just clarinet. Yeah, it's all great. And then just, it's so powerful just being by itself, right? And you might even have like a little bit of diminuendo here, just really pulling back, right? It's più piano, right? Not mezzo piano, right? And then just suddenly, bam, dun dun. Or maybe you could have a push at the end, right? Maybe these last two bars could have a crescendo to forte. So that just like kind of leads the energy back to the full orchestra. So it's not such an abrupt kind of a thing. All right, so that's the connecting passages. Now let's go back to the episodes, right? Beethoven is having a couple of episodes. And you can just tell his friends would be going, yeah, what else is new? All right, so 57. Double D. All right. And as I said before, this is ripe for adding. If you're going bum bum, maybe you could add trumpets da da, right? Da 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 da. And a big fat boom on a D, right? With your timpani. Marcato accent with a sforzando under it, right? Just boom. You just really want this to be hooting, right? Yeah, and this is really nice. Just using the winds to open things up, and not having to even push the strings up that high. Right? It's very, very powerful, and pushing forward to fortissimo. And comments that I wrote about the trills, absolutely important for you to resolve this, because the listener doesn't know whether this is major or minor the way you've scored it, right? And neither does the player. The player will be thinking, should this be a G sharp? Right? I got a G sharp here, I got a G sharp here, I got a G there, and I'm hearing a G natural, right? They'll be hearing it as G natural, these Fs, right, in the orchestra. You got to resolve all this. And then same thing, boom, add trumpet once again, and timpani. All right, and then it just continues on. There's this wonderful kind of like almost stumbling nimbleness, right? Just like really trying to catch up. And I think that you really bring that out here. And then this little answer here this is just brilliant. I think this is one of the best parts in this whole score. It's just this little answer here by your wind section above. It's like right, and see, look, right? Trumpets and horns, right? And why can't we have like a big old boom on a G flat here in your timpani, or maybe D flat? Like we take that D and change it to a D flat from the previous boom. All right, and then and this is all great. We talked about that. Now let's go to the next episode. A lot of lost groschens today. And then just like an F, a boom on an F, bring in the trumpets. Do you know what I mean? It won't hurt anything. And this is all scored pretty much the same as before. I like this high A starting here. Yeah, so that's all very solid. And and just give us a nice a nice big fat written G here. I would say sforzando with a marcato accent, same thing here. Whatever this is, this low written E, sforzando with a marcato accent, and a big boom on your timpani, right, and adding trumpets possibly. Yeah, and then once again, this is just very, very clever. Yeah, just answering this little call and response with the clarinets, and it's good because it gives the clarinet some time to relax their chops for just a couple of bars. I got no problem with this. Just sort of that kind of scrambling to kind of keep up. No, if we could retune the to a D flat before we do it here, you could add some timpani here. Right? Or you could just have an F, right? The middle note of the chord. Okay, so that just leaves our coda. All right, so my note in my evaluation criteria is building forward with graceful poise and cooler colors, and you absolutely do that. Bum bum ba dum bum bum. Just really, really nicely done. Yeah, just using some good judgment here, between the, between little wind and brass and solo gestures. Yeah. Maybe you can bring in some rallentando here. Be more deliberate about it, right? Maybe the soloist doesn't need to do anything here. Maybe everybody else can do things, right? And then that gives them plenty of time to take their breath here. Or, if you really want the soloist to be leading the show, then you could leave that in, but yeah. But I would definitely suggest a rallentando here. This is weird. It's something that MuseScore does. The way that this... Maybe this is just an optical illusion, but it looks to me like this beam is sort of pulling up here. Oh, I see. Yeah, there seems to be like an added beam, which doesn't belong there, implying that these are sixteenths. I wonder what happened there. Oh, you know what I bet happened is that your two voices reversed, right? And so the one on top is flipped. In that way you have... So just flip it back, right? Just go ahead and have the whole bar in two different voices, okay? Yeah, wow, that was just a mind twist. I was like, look at that. What the heck is going on here? Everything is wrong about this, right? So flip it back. Okay. And then, just like you do close to direct transcription, just adapting for the... and then changing the harmony here. I think that's really, really fun. But right, maybe here you could change this into just into 4 rather than instead of a pentuplet, just change it into 4 semiquavers going up to the trill, right? Unless you have a cadenza worked out, and you should write out a cadenza or work one out with your soloist, put it in, right? And then the sky's the limit. But whatever you should do, I think you should end up trilling on an F sharp. Bum bum whatever, but yeah, cut the pastoral symphony ending, right? Just come up with something that is is more individual, and that that won't be like a callback. All right, I think that it'll be the strongest possible kind of a thing. All right, so wow. Those are my comments on your wonderful second movement, which of course I realize in the plan that you've got is the third movement now, because you have inserted a Beethoven aria as your second movement. And like I mentioned before, if you want to take a look at that with me one-on-one next year sometime, and maybe even go over the score again, have me take another look at it in preparation, or maybe have me do some prep work or whatever, just get in touch, okay? I mean, if you're serious, I would say don't bother unless you've got a serious premiere planned, or you want to get ready for the conductor to look at or whatever, okay? But I think that you've got, just like our previous score with Dean, this is something that was worth performing. This is something that should be performed. Pretty much every one of these dotted longa evaluations or dotted longa entries, they are some solid work, should be played, right? They deserve to be played. That's why I'm spending 3 hours talking about it, right? It isn't just the time that it would take, because if I were just going to breeze through it, we wouldn't have the extended evaluation, so it would be half as long, right? Maybe 90 minutes. But, spending the 3 hours on it is really worth it to me, and I hope it is to you and a lot of our viewers out there. And just, one final note about that is that I've been looking at the stats for the views, and sometimes in orchestration challenge evaluation videos, you'll see a lot of like peaks during like the mock-up, right? So people will listen to the mock-up a few times, maybe watch some of the evaluation that I've got, and maybe not, or maybe watch half of it and kind of move on. But with these, I'm seeing solid views all the way through. People are tending to watch everything, and I just want to say I really appreciate that, because I know that you're still watching it, because like looking at the way that the views are, I know you're still watching it. So I'm just saying to all you people out there, thank you so much for just really being, like the longer the video, the more intense and more committed the viewing, and that I think is just wonderful. So yeah, so hey, follow up with that soloist. Try to get this performed, okay, Noel? I mean, and just on a personal note, I want to say I really appreciate how supportive you've been through this process. Like you have been such a strong supporter on Patreon and in the community, and never an unkind word or impatient gesture. You've just really been, if anything, you've been saying, don't worry about it, Thomas, take as much time as you need. And I feel like, you're one of the people who deserve the most me getting tough with myself, right? And not taking any more time to do this. So, which is why I'm really glad that I had enough energy and, enough presence of mind and everything else to really get things together and to do these last few videos this month. And hopefully the last three, there's only three more to go, folks. The last three videos I'll have the time to do it. This upcoming week, I actually have a lot more free time. I'll have the house mostly to myself. And so just so long as my health holds up, and if it doesn't, I can sort of limp along at the end of the month. But I really want to get this done in the year 2025 and not have it go yet a further year, releasing a 2023 evaluation in 2026. That just is beyond the pale for me. I am a not really a workaholic, but a very dedicated person in these kinds of things, and I really don't like things backing up. So that's where I'm at. So anyways, thanks everybody for putting up with my with my babbling. Thanks so much, Noel, for your patience and kindness and your support. It means so much to me. And you've let me know how much a lot of this has helped out, and I'm hearing very thoughtful gestures of thanks and appreciation over the past couple of weeks for different things. People who have been reading and ordering my books, and people who have been asking me advice online and so on. You guys have just been wonderful, and you make it all worth it. So thank you so very, very much. And hopefully I will see you next weekend with a couple more of these, and then we'll see when the very, very last one drops.